Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Developer Express. Become a UI superhero with Dev Express controls and libraries. Deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today. By leveraging your existing knowledge, you can build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. You can download your free 30-day trial at dx.hanselminutes.com. That's dx.hanselminutes.com.
From hanselminutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 482. In this episode, Scott talks with technical project manager and conference speaker Anjuan Simmons about fan culture and the rise of, quote, Nerdland.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I'm talking with Anjuan Simmons. By the time you hear this recording, he will have spoken at CodeConf. That's coming up for you in Tennessee, is that right?
That's right.
Yep, and you give talks all over, and when I met you, you were talking at South by Southwest. We've been there together a couple of times.
Yep, absolutely.
And what's your day job?
I am a software project manager, and I manage a set of developers who are really very talented, and I help them deliver software on time and on budget.
Mm-hmm. And you said that like a true software development manager. Like you and I have had this discussion before that we are, nerds, geeks. We're techies. Our brains operate a certain way.
That's
and
right.
That has caused some challenges in interacting with other people, particularly our significant others.
That is correct. We are married to normals, and it's fun to see how that plays out.
What kind of things have you bumped into? I mean, is your wife? I know she's extremely accomplished in her own right, but she's not, I assume, taking apart the remote control on a regular basis.
No, she throws the remote control to me to take it apart, and then I throw it back to her once I fixed it.
So you like me are IT support for the house.
Absolutely.
I feel like my wife does not appreciate the work that's involved in keeping a home network running at peak capacity.
Nor does mine. She just simply complains about, why haven't you fixed this yet? Come on, you're a tech guy. Get it done.
Yeah, I my friend Saran, who runs Code Newbies, her husband, when I met Saran, of course, is a programmer, and she's highly technical, so I just assumed that her husband would not be. I just assumed that geeks marry normals, so I figured she's super techie, he'll be not. They're equally techie, which is amazing because the tech that runs their house is so much more powerful. And I keep thinking if I could just get my significant other to be more techie, like there'd be no end to what we could accomplish as far as in the house.
Yeah, but with my wife, that ship sailed a long time ago. So yeah, she actually started out studying comp sci, and she, after I think one semester, she did okay, but she realized immediately this is not for me. So she switched to MIS, which is a much more sensible degree to get from undergrad.
What is MIS?
Management Information Systems.
Ah, okay. But this is interesting, though, because you have two managers in the house, though. How does that work?
It means that there are two cooks in the kitchen, and sometimes the cooking is burned. So, it works well. And I think that even though my wife is decidedly normal, she is an extremely intelligent woman. She has a PhD in business, and we are able to complement each other in a lot of areas, despite the fact that she has no heart nor no idea about geek culture or how Nerdland works.
That's a very, very similar situation. My wife has a master's, an MBA, and she's working on now her third degree, getting a bachelor's of science and nursing.
Awesome.
She'll be done in August. So there's basically nothing I can tell her. I am allowed to reboot the router. That's the extent of what I'm allowed to do. Yeah, so I can't tell her anything. And what kind of ongoing challenges? Like, I've been married 15 years. I know you've been married as long?
13 years and some change.
Right. So, it obviously it's working, right? What do you think that we can learn from people who are in similar kind of mixed relationships between geeks and normals? And do we have anything to teach them?
I think that one of the things is to just, like a lot of advice, is the first step is to admit that you have a problem. And so let me give you an example of how much of a normal my wife is. If I put my wife to the side and just said, hey, babe, if I said 3 names of people, and if you just tell me how these related, or is there any relationship? And I said, Picard, Riker, Troy. She would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Are these new types of shoes? So she has no understanding at all of geek culture. So I have resigned myself to the fact that these are things that, even though I love them deeply and they're a big part of who I am, that's something that we simply can't share. So I think admitting that there's a problem is the first step, and making peace with that.
Interesting. Does she sit with you, though, and watch these shows with disinterest, or have you just decided after 13 years of marriage that you just best go to the movies by yourself?
I have decided that it's best that I go to the movies by myself or with other geek friends. So let me give you an example. We went to see, I believe it was the last Iron Man, before the age of Ultron. And I just looked at my wife, and, Iron Man 3 was okay. Not my favorite one. I liked the first one the best still, but I just looked over at her, and she was just in pain. It was like agony. And I felt so bad. Like, I'm enjoying this movie, but I look over at my wife, and she is so not enjoying the movie that it makes my enjoyment of the movie very, very limited. And so I've learned that, okay, look, babe, I'm glad you're here. There's no one else I would rather watch a movie with other than you. But I think that from now on, I'm just going to go with my boys, and then we'll find some movie that we both enjoy. So I think that coming to that knowledge of there's just certain things that she is so not into it, even though she very kindly wants to experience them with me, it's just best to often just let her stay at home and let me do other things with other people.
Yeah, in early on in the marriage, 2-3 years, you have no kids and you're a couple years in, you want to spend all your time together and you want to share everything that makes you with the other person. And then if you discover that they're not into something, you want to push harder and well, no, but you really, if you just spend some time watching Firefly, you would understand why it has all the answers, in life. And you push and you push and you push, but you're right. Somewhere your relationship reaches a level of maturity, and it's it's okay to like stuff on my own.
Absolutely. And there are things that she's really into that I'm not into. She likes tennis. So Serena Williams is one of her favorite heroes, and I like Serena. I think she's cool. I think it's great that she's won so many matches, but I could go without seeing several of them. But I'll sit next to her on the couch and I'll watch some of the matches and understand that, okay, she's into this, and therefore I'll go into it with her. Yeah.
It is lonely, though, sometimes, because you'll see something or read something, and then you'll turn to your partner, and you're like, but just look at this, and then there's nothing. But I find this a lot with comics, I'll read comics in bed, and she's reading something, I don't know, she's reading a nursing manual, or she's reading some nonfiction or something, and then we'll say, did you just see what happened? And there's just no interest. It's unfortunate, but what we have been able to do, though, is find genres that we can share. So I thought it was one of those things where we're always going to read different kinds of books and always see different kinds of movies. But I've learned that my wife loves action movies. So The Expendables is one of her most favorite series of movies. And while it's not sci-fi or geek, it's pretty ridiculous. So I appreciate that,
Yeah, and I think that my wife and I also enjoy a good action flick. She likes more action/drama. And so it can't just be all guns blazing and folks jumping all, around killing, folks. But I think that if there's a plot, if there's a little bit of drama, then she and I can both enjoy a movie. So she would hate The Expendables, but she would like some movie where there's a little bit more, I think, plot.
Mm-hmm. We actually, one of the ones that we really got geeked out together about was John Wick with Keanu Reeves.
We have not seen that.
It's like, it's got a plot, but it's also got feeling, and there's like, he's got a pet. So there's gravitas, and then there's his relationship with his wife and how that informs all of his, butt kicking that he does.
Interesting. Actually, one movie that my wife loved, and I was shocked because this is another one where I think I'm going to have to drag her to the movie theater, was Ex Machina. She loved Ex Machina. And that is so geeky that I was like, what? But it was done in a way where the technology was really in the background. It was more about the plot and the ideas. So I think that if there are really cerebral, really deep movies that are geeky, then I can get her to go. She'll actually enjoy it. It's just that it's often tough to find that mix.
Yeah. My wife was like that about that movie, Her, when the guy falls in love with Siri.
Right. Or Scarlett Johansson.
Yes. And that got her thinking, oh, and then The Time Traveler's Wife.
We haven't seen that. Okay. I'll have to try that.
That's a great movie, great book, just an all in all great experience. So we find ways to come together on stuff like that. I do wish though that I could take her to a comic book convention, but unfortunately we have kids, so I take them and they think that's the greatest thing ever.
Absolutely. And that's one saving grace of if you are married to a normal and you reproduce, then you hopefully have kids that have geek DNA. And my kids love that stuff. I mean, they are into geek culture. I took my comic book collection that I started collecting in 1981. So I have a few really good issues. And so they're still wrapped in the acid-free bags and with the cardboard backing. And I put them on my boys' walls. And so I've covered the entire wall with comics from the 80s and 90s. And so there's a lot of Spider-Man, a lot of X-Men, because I was really into those titles. And so I felt that I was passing my childhood down to them. And so my kids often say, well, can I read that? I'm like, nope, you're not ready for that yet, but it's on the wall and I'll take it down. We'll read it together when you're ready. Cause I have, Punisher and have some more adult titles, on their wall, but they see that, hey, the things that they're making movies out of now, that wasn't to that, 20, 25 years ago. And so that way we connect over geek culture.
That one is one of the amazing things about being our age, not to give our ages away, but to be our age at this time, is that it almost feels like there's a vindication of our geekery from 20, 30 years ago, now that they're making all these movies. And, the Infinity Wars are coming, and I already know what's going to happen unless they change it dramatically. We're like looking for the clues from our high school years and our middle school years.
And in many ways, it's not just feeling vindicated, but it's the fact that we suffered through the 90s when they tried to make movies with 90s technology, and it was horrible. And so it's not just that we've seen that Hollywood has come around to the fact that there are compelling stories that they can make and make a lot of money, but we saw the many failed attempts over the past 15 years or so. And now we're at the point where the technology has caught up with the storytelling. And so we can enjoy that. So it is a good feeling to know that a lot of what we knew was great when we were kids and we were geeks and, people didn't understand it. But when we see Marvel coming up with the Infinity Wars and when now they're going to probably do Civil War and knowing those storylines, yes, that is so amazing.
Yeah. Did you watch Daredevil on Netflix? My wife very much enjoyed that.
I have not. That's another series that I'm going to have to check out. There, one challenge is that there's so much good TV right now. There's Sense8, there's Daredevil, there's, Game of Thrones, which is of course more fantasy, but there's so much good geek content on both TV and at the movies that I can't keep up. But it's a good problem to have to say that there's so much Nerdland around here. It's hard to explore it all.
Where do you think the line between Nerdland, is nerd culture and geek culture gone mainstream now? Is everyone a geek?
I wouldn't say that everyone is a geek, but I would say that people are more geekish. I think that when you see what's at the theaters, when you see what's on TV, where you see how personal devices are, whether it's a smartphone or a watch and the Apple Watch, though Apple won't comment on how many they've sold, I think that it's become such an iconic figure in terms of, people like Beyonce, right after the watch came out, she was doing photo shoots wearing one, I think that geek culture and the things that geeks love have become more of the culture. And I still think that there's a ways to go, but I think that there's far more acceptance of these things than there was even a decade ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My wife has often asked me, like, what is a nerd or what is a geek? Because those terms, have a certain baggage along with them. They evoke an image of a specific individual and the people in Revenge of the Nerds. There's a nerd or geek monoculture, but I've been explaining it to her to say that it is to be really, really enthused about something. Like you could be a needlepoint geek, or a car nerd. If that's what you're really into, is that you're excited about something so much that it exudes from you. You overflow with enthusiasm over that topic.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, a geek is a fan. It is someone who is really into something, whether that's needlepoint, whether that's the Avengers or anything else. I think that you're really into something to the degree that you want to know everything about it, right? So, a lot of us grew up taking apart computers or televisions because we were so into electronics that we had to know how they worked. And I think that is really the essence of a geek. It's a fan. I think that the Japanese word is otaku, which is just someone who's really into something. And so that's the essence of geekdom, just an almost irrational desire to know something.
I want to take a brief moment to thank my sponsors, Syncfusion, this week. The first and only complete Hadoop distribution designed for Windows is now available from Syncfusion. You can literally deploy a production-ready big data cluster in minutes. This revolutionary big data platform will not only change the way that you approach big data, but it is 100% free for everyone, with free commercial support for Syncfusion Plus members. Learn more at syncfusion.com/bigdata. I think that's great. Saying that it's being a fan. The boys were really into this book when they were like, I think 4 years old or 5 years old. It's called Joey Fly, Private Eye. And it was just all about this actual fly who was a private eye. And they thought it was the greatest thing ever. And they read the book and they talked about it for weeks. And, that's where it could have ended. But I encouraged them to send a letter to the author of Joey Fly, Private Eye. So they, agonized over it for a week and they wrote it in crayon and they sent this, we really like your book and will you please make more? And the author of this children's book sent them a picture of them as flies, as bugs. And that is now up on their wall, behind glass. We framed it. So it seemed like, you could read a book and enjoy it, but if you're going to be a fan, you're writing fan fiction, you're sending fan mail. And when he sent back that letter to them, they cemented their fandom for forever.
That is amazing. And that brings up something that I think is cool to live in this new era of geekness. And that is there is so much more access to the creators. And your sons use, I assume, snail mail to do it. But for example, I purchased for my daughter a comic book series called Princeless, which is about...
I love Princeless.
Yes, and I bought Princeless, and I gave it to my daughter, and then I tweeted a picture of my daughter reading the first volume. And the author of Princeless retweeted that, and we exchanged a couple of tweets, and I was like, wow, this is something where... and this happened literally within hours, where I have introduced my daughter to something that is really written for her and with her in mind. And then the creator of that work has connected with me. And I think that it's so awesome to have the ability to connect with the people who are creating this. Because, when I was reading Marvel Comics, there's no way I could connect with a writer or an artist, or it would be really difficult because there's only so much snail mail that someone can read. But now, whether it's through Twitter or even email or others, social media, the barriers to connection between the creator and the people who consume that content are much lower.
Yeah, the barrier to entry. Like before, you send a snail mail and you assume that there's a pile of snail mail sitting unread in your favorite writer's, workroom, and they're never going to get to you. Or if they do, it's luck.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've had those experiences more than once. And you feel like you're building a relationship, even though you're really kind of not. It's a fan. It's a safe relationship. I read a comic book by a comic artist named Afua Richardson called Genius, and it did the exact same thing. I tweeted about how great it was, and then a couple days later, there she is, and then you start looking at who she follows, and you're like, oh wow, this is a cool person. Like, this is a human out there doing really great work, and then it makes you want to support their work and do other things you can.
Absolutely. And I think that if I was a creator of any kind of work, especially if it's artistic in nature, then it would behoove me to use this media platform to connect. When people reach out to me, to reach out to them, I think that it's both in the benefit, it both redounds to the benefit of both the creator and the person who's a fan. And so this is just a great time to be alive and to be experiencing the spread of geek culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Being able to find communities. Before, they were just in forums or in certain CompuServe rooms. But now, if you're into something, you're going to be able to find people that are into it as well. And I also think that there's what's the word? There's an acceptance of geek culture more than before. I always felt isolated because I was really into things like comics. But now it seems like if you are into something, for the most part, kids that at least my nieces and nephews, they're not being teased in high school for being into something. They just are. Everyone's into something.
I totally agree. And I think that is one other benefit of having this wide set of tools that people can use to connect, whether it's in the lunchroom at school where kids, and I agree, are very rarely teased for being into stuff, whether there are online forums, whether there are Facebook groups, or there's tools like Slack or Flowdoc, where you can form a group of people who are interested in a certain topic and you can just geek out on it. And I think that this is a great time, especially for young people, where, when you and I were growing up, it was very tough to be a geek and you were ostracized for being into Dungeons and Dragons or comic books. And I think that our children and the ones who come after them will live in a much more open and accepting world where if you're really into something, that's cool. People will agree with that and probably say that's a good thing.
And have you found that to be the case with the things that you introduced? Like, to your daughter, is she into stuff and not getting any hassle for it?
Absolutely. My daughter, like I said, she can take her pencilless comic book to school and and she's told me this, like, oh, what's that? Can I read that? Or when my boys are into things. And in fact, my sons have found especially that they are drawn into more of geek culture by the friends who they hang out with. And they're reading things like, obviously, Harry Potter was a great, I think, force for doing this, for making things that are really geeky more mainstream. And there is a book series called Percy Jackson that my sons got really into because a lot of their friends were reading that title. So I do think that there is a lot of acceptance of geek culture among children, primarily because it's just so popular. And so, in fact, you are more than likely the odd boy out or the odd girl out if you're not into these things, rather than the opposite.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also cool that there's a lot more diversity of story. Princeless is a great example. And actually, true story, literally yesterday, my 7-year-old boy and I read Princeless again, volume 1. It's about a princess who basically gets tired of sitting in a castle and she says, I'm just going to save myself. And regardless of the obvious gender interest in that story, my 7-year-old just thought that was really cool because he was like, of course, like she sat around, she waited, no one's coming to save her, oh, she'll save herself. It made total sense. And I'm hoping that informs their attitudes towards gender in the future.
And I think it's so interesting that not only has geek culture become more mainstream, but I think geek culture has become aware of the need to reflect the world and not just one perspective or one demographic group. And we see a lot of interesting things being done, by Marvel with having a female Thor. We see the introduction of a Miss Marvel who is Muslim. And there's such great storytelling. And it's not some kind of gimmick where, well, let's just turn Thor into a girl and let's kind of keep telling Thor stories. I think that their storytelling becomes richer, and they're finding that by embracing a diverse world, by making the fantasy world reflective of the actual world, I think that they're finding that there's a lot more ability to tell stories that resonate with readers. And I've been really happy to see that. And I've been happy to see that embracing of the fact that we all have stories to tell. And if we embrace the diversity that's in the world and reflect that, then storytelling becomes richer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the point you made there, that it's not just, oh, let's turn this person brown, let's turn that person into a girl. The stories have to be good. And not only is the storytelling in Miss Marvel, where it's a 16-year-old Pakistani American, fantastic storytelling because the writer, G. Willow Wilson, is just amazing
Absolutely.
writer. But if you look at Miles Morales, the Black and Latino Ultimate Spider-Man, that worked because the art was just amazing. Some of the best art that I've ever seen in a comic book was in the first issues there of Ultimate Spider-Man. But the storytelling was thoroughly interesting and was not just simply a retelling of Peter Parker's story.
Exactly, and I've seen the same thing with the I call her Spider-Gwen, right? Where in this alternate world where Peter Parker was the one who died, and then Gwen becomes Spider-Man, or I shouldn't say Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, and you have this female Spider-Man, and again they could have did it where she's exact same as Spider-Man, right? This web-slinging joke telling hero, but I think that they've taken a more nuanced view, and I really have enjoyed following that development in geek culture. But of course, the reality is that just like the real world, and as you embrace the real world, you get into real world issues. And so with the Fantastic Four movie, with the choice to make a Black Human Torch and seeing that backlash, I think that that's something that we will continue to see. And again, being a father, I find it's important to both celebrate the embracing of diverse points of view in geek culture, but to have real conversations about there are some people who will be against that, and helping my children navigate that is part of my role. And I think that, again, back to the point of having a spouse who is a normal, I think being able to have those conversations is something that I can do where my wife may struggle to even understand what the problem is, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that I try to be an advocate and an ally for diverse things, and I have a diverse family, therefore I want the world to be representatively diverse, but it's comic books. Why does it matter if Human Torch is black or Thor is a woman? It seems to me like Thor was a frog for a couple of episodes, My kids think that Spider-Ham, like the pig Spider-Man from an alternate universe, is about the greatest thing ever. If we can't mix it up and try new things, then what's the point? Like, of all the scenarios that we could do this, fiction would be the place to do it.
I completely agree. And I think in a world where Spider-Man can be a ham, Thor can be a frog, where Superman did all kinds of things when exposed to different types of kryptonite, surely we can expand our imagination a little bit and see differences in skin color, gender. But I think that the fact that it's an issue is something that is real. It's something that doesn't make sense to me, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And I think it's something that I really take seriously in my role as a parent to guide kids who do, like I said before, have some of my geek DNA, and just help them understand that there are some people who see this as a bad thing. Let's talk about that and understand what we can learn from the reaction of people to this fantasy world, and see, can that better prepare us to deal with some of those reactions in the real world?
That is the right way to go about doing that. I mean, people when they talk about Star Wars, they often talk about, the canon. And if they hear a story in a Star Wars story that's not part of the Star Wars canon, they get upset. And because they clearly have some emotional investment into that universe. And when you mess with their universe, then that's a problem. It's interesting, though, when people find that it's the gender or the color or the nationality of that character that matters as far as canon, as opposed to the story. Like, I could see if they changed Peter Parker's origin story, I could see where I would get upset about that. Like, wait a second, well, he was still bitten by a spider. Like, that's the part I hang on to. The race and gender part of Peter Parker isn't the part that makes him Peter Parker. So it's interesting to see who either consciously or subconsciously chooses to hang on to canon as being, or an aspect of canon as being particularly important.
I completely agree. And I am a person who loves canon, and I have seen some of the ways that the movies diverge from canon. And I think that even though I love the original thinking that Stan Lee and all the people who were involved in creating the Marvel Universe had, 30, 40 years ago when they were doing that, I think that you have to diverge that from that a little bit because the world has changed and storytelling has changed. And I think that you have to update that. Still keeping the essence of these heroes and what makes them heroes, and what makes Peter Parker, what makes Reed Richards. Keep all that. But I think that there is a benefit to remixing some of that for a new generation. And I think that, in many ways, the Ultimates line of Marvel, I would not say that it saved the company, but it made, I think, Marvel position to do what they're doing with the cinematic universe. And so I think if Marvel had hesitated or not gone as far as they did in some ways with the Ultimates line, I'm not sure if they would have had the ability to do the movies. And so we see some of that in having a Black Nick Fury, like in Ultimates. And so they took some of that and put that into the movies, I think, almost in recognition of the fact that they had to remix some of these storylines in order to make them more mainstream.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think by legitimizing and saying that the Ultimates universe is definitely part of the Marvel universe, that introduces the concept of the multiverse, which means that the cinematic universe, which is kind of what we call it, is its own parallel universe as well. And then that means there can be n number of parallel universes.
Exactly. And I think that instead of trying to deny that, I think that we should embrace that, because if you have multiple parallel universe, then you have almost infinite ability to tell stories. And I think that at the end of the day, sure, comic book art is a big part of it. I think that the art is vital, but I think really we get into these comic books because of stories, right? It's the ability to tell compelling stories that speak to the human condition, that speak to the hopes and dreams of young people, that speak to things that we can all understand, with, of course, the unusual incidents of being bitten by a spider or being, from a, ancient Norse mythology. Sure, those are elements thrown in that, of course, are fantastical, but really it's the storytelling that compels us. So I hope that people would see that the ability to remix, the ability to mess with canon a little bit is actually a good thing, and not something that we should organize against and riot.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And hopefully we will be able to pass this culture on, as we're trying to our kids, and maybe to our significant others a little bit over time. Another 10 or 15 years, I may actually get my wife to care about this stuff.
Hope springs eternal. And I think just like my wife loved Ex Machina, I think like all parts of marriage, there's going to be things that you always work on. And I think that whenever I meet people who are single and then they get serious with someone and they think, well, if we get married, it's just going to all be good and we're going to immediately align. And I'm like, no, don't think that. Marriage is a work in progress, and you're constantly trying to tweak all parts of how you relate to this person, whether it's through what you're into with the entertainment, whether it's how you deal with money, whether it's where you go on vacation. You have to have those conversations. And I think that the best marriages are ones where both people evolve, right? We leave a little bit of room for change in order to accommodate our partner. And I think that, like you just said, over 10 years, I think that you will be very successful in helping your spouse evolve. And I'm hopeful that I will as well.
Of course, if you ask my wife, she would tell you that another 10 years and she'll have me exactly where she wants me. So it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on relationships and geek culture in general, Anjuan.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.